It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Hello, Kate. It's really nice to see you again. We only ever get to meet on video, but it's always a pleasure. And this is our second program in November, the 26th of November. And it's full again. Always full, always interesting. But what have we got, Kate? Give me some highlights.
Always full, Nigel. And one day we'll get back in that studio and be together again. This week we have got Neil Mosley talking about the impact of COVID-19 on higher education and universities, very topical. Brian Murphy, always a good interview, he's been on the show before, so he was talking to you, Nigel, I believe. And then we've got Holy Trinity, got Shannon Tipton, Michelle Ockers and Laura Overton all together in a group discussion, one not to miss.
Holy Trinity indeed. Enjoy the show. I'm really delighted to speak once again to Brian Murphy. I don't think Brian has spoken to Learning Now Television since he's been working at AstraZeneca, where he is now the global head of learning and enterprise capability. Fascinating job title as well, by the way, Brian. What I want to talk to you about is a project that you're running in AstraZeneca about adult learning and increasing your workforce's capability, ability, and enthusiasm for learning. So just could you tell us why you decided to run this project and what some of the interim outcomes appear to be? Because I think it's really interesting and definitely worth sharing.
Thank you, Nigel, and thanks for the invitation to come and have a chat with you and your listeners today. We've been doing a piece of work. It's a bit of a niche piece of work, and I'll explain what it is in a second, but I think we might be onto something. It might turn into more mainstream work over time. Basically, we've been running a learning trial, well, in effect, a learning experiment to really understand how our people learn and can increase their learning agility as a habit, as a practice. Fundamentally, AstraZeneca, you may have heard of us a bit recently in the news. We're a pharmaceutical life sciences company, and the company is at an incredible point in its history. We are doing very well. The organization is returned to growth and is performing well. And now we're in the middle of COVID, where we are doing, and our scientists and our manufacturing people are doing some really important work around the development of the vaccine. So it's a really interesting time to be looking at the topic of learning in our company. We feel, and our people feel, the responsibility to really leave no stone unturned when it comes to our ability to learn and improve. And when we looked at our learning culture and how we learn at AstraZeneca, we've introduced the 3 E's concept: experience, exposure, education. I'm sure people are very familiar with that format, and it's very well received. But we still have our people still cling on to looking at learning primarily through an education lens, and that's not surprising. Very, very highly qualified, highly educated workforce, particularly in the R&D side of things. So we got curious about really understanding if we just focus on education, we don't think about experiential learning, true learning in the flow of work. I'm not talking about bolting on formal onto informal. I'm talking about real in the flow. How can we help our people access that in a more deliberate way and build a real skill of learning to learn?
Yeah, so into the daily process of work, you're building in conscious learning that can be shared, not just for individuals, but shared around teams and shared around the organization. How many people have you got? Could you just qualify that for us for a second?
Yeah,
how big is AstraZeneca?
Well, AstraZeneca is about 75,000, moving towards 80,000 people. We're actually hiring a lot in China and places like that at the moment. So we're in over 100 countries. So, and there's an interesting, if you're not in pharmaceuticals, as I am relatively new to pharmaceuticals, the interesting thing about pharma is that you're catering for different personas in this organization, this value chain. You know, we have amazing scientists who are doing incredible work in the R&D space, in laboratories, in that type of environment. We have manufacturing and production people who are producing the medicines and the vaccines, and then we have commercial salespeople as well. So, and there's a lot of other personas as well, but they're the main ones. So, I think we're a pretty diverse employee set in that regard. So the learning trial, you know, was actually a relatively small trial. So we took 160 of our colleagues from across the organization, and we set up a control group in parallel. And we said, right, you know, if we take 3 of our AstraZeneca learning behaviors, so we have values and behaviors like most companies, collaboration, curiosity, and bravery are 3 that we've harnessed and said, if we can prime those behaviors in our people, in this 160 of our colleagues, can we help them identify learning moments as they happen during the day in the flow of work? They could be formal or informal, generally more likely than not informal. Can we help them prime those behaviors to identify those learning moments, take action on those learning moments, and have the impact in the role? And you know, we worked with a behavioral scientist to help us shape this, and we sent behavioral nudges each day around those 3 behaviors, and we asked people to record their learning moments during the day. And I did this myself, Nigel. I was a participant, and I'll be honest with you, like learning any skill or working any muscle, the first few weeks were painful. It was hard for me to prioritize this, to make a choice. I want to get better at this. I want to apply myself. I want to practice this and reflect. But towards the end of the 4 weeks, it became second nature. And actually, when we stopped, I felt I was really missing something. Anyway, we ran the data, and we had a control group in parallel who didn't receive these nudges. They weren't going through the same experience, although we were assessing their ability to learn in the flow. And we saw some marked changes. We were able to track across all the three of these prime behaviors. We're able to have a pull through in terms of increasing people's ability to identify learning moments as they happen, act on them, and then be able to see the impact. And we're producing a paper at the moment on this, which we're going to publish. And I'll continue to share some things on my LinkedIn profile. There's a video up there, which I think you probably saw, and this is why we're talking today. I did see.
That's what sparked my curiosity. I thought it was fascinating. It's the best 3 minutes I spent for a long time.
No, it's been really an eye opener, because you know, some of us have been trying to support a more holistic view of learning, you know, through whether that be through the 3 E's or thinking about a continuous learning approach for many years. This is the first time I've got scientific about it, you know, and we work in a discovery organization. You know, running this type of field experiment has been very well received by our company. Sometimes as L&D, we can get a little bit perceived to be a little bit fluffy around this stuff. Well, we have run a field experiment with a control group with real rigor to be able to demonstrate the fact that you can develop a learning habit or begin to develop a learning habit over a 4-week period using behavioral science nudges.
What's important is the recognition that learning is a habit. We do have a tendency to believe that if I speak warmly to you about learning, that's the job done, or I provide a piece of technology for you that gives you access and, hey, I've done my job. It's actually not true. It is a habit that needs to be built into the workflow. And you are actually proving that. And that's what's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like anything in life, right, Nigel? If you want to improve at something, you've got to apply yourself. You've got to practice that. And learning, it's a bit of I know we're applying this to the subject itself. right? But it absolutely is the same. And you see this, it's a high performance approach, right? I mean, you see this with sports people, with people who are really relentlessly focused on high performance. They see learning and continuous improvement as a core piece of their success, and they actually get really good at it, and they put a lot of work into it. So this approach that we have been taking here is applying the same principles, using a behavioral science approach. And when you see that video, and I'm glad you saw it on LinkedIn, obviously the benefits of this and the data we're gathering as a company is really, really interesting, and it's going to have, I think, going to change how we position learning and we think about learning in the company. But just listening to the people who've been through this, participants, they are, something has been, awakened in them around their understanding of learning. They're getting huge energy from this and huge upsides in terms of them seeing that we're very busy. I mean, we're never been more busy than now. And all of these rich learning moments are happening all the time around us. It's our choice around whether we're able to identify them, and then take action on them in order to extract that learning and then inject it back into the work. So it's like anything in life, we all have choices to make around what we prioritize, where we put our attention, and learning to learn and being good at this stuff is an ingredient. I think corporate learning functions have been shying away from this area for a long time, and myself included, because it's hard. It's hard to get into this. Well, in the flow of work, what's our role as a learning function? I think this potentially gives us a bit of a roadmap around how we can help support that without necessarily managing it for people day to day. And that's why I'm excited about this piece of work.
You've really tried hard to make it a serious experiment, not just, let's throw a few ideas around the room, and you're getting serious data back. And the evidence that you're presenting is not your evidence. You're not saying, oh, this worked brilliantly. You're letting the people who are involved speak for themselves. And some of the comments that they've made are extraordinary. I know this is a slide maybe seems slightly exaggerated, but I don't think so. You're actually changing people's lives. They're seeing themselves differently. They're seeing their work differently, and they're seeing their capabilities and potential differently. Wow, bottle that. Yeah. You're really doing something incredibly important.
I think, Nigel, all of us, even if those of us who work in the learning profession, we are conditioned by what we automatically think learning is or learning isn't. And one of our scientists on the video, he talks about not having to be a lone wolf learner anymore. And this phrase really struck me. I was like, hang on, what does he mean by that? Why would he even think that was a good idea to start with? And of course, this trial has helped him understand that collaborative learning and learning through your network is so rich. In fact, all the data shows that the highest performing people are the best networked, right? We know that. But it was interesting because, if you come from an academic background, I'm going to be, this is an unfair generalization, right? But I want to try and prove a point. There often when we are educated or we go through a certain, particularly if you're a deep subject matter expert, your ability to go and research on your own and do that is something which is sort of hardwired into you. And that is important. Of course, it's important. But looking much more holistically, the light bulb that went off in one of our colleagues' minds here in the video is, wow, I don't have to be the lone wolf learner. I can actually learn with others. And that's going to be in addition to my own learning, that's going to be a lot more that's going to be much richer. The other thing is he is contributing to his learning network as well. So some of these concepts to us mightn't be that complicated, but when you're in the throes of the day-to-day job, it's about how you can help people, invite people in to see the benefit of that, and they're going to show up differently as a result. So yeah, at the end of the day, the data and the research here is great, and it's going to help us. But it's the stories that are coming from our participants that really give us the real, I think that's the real story.
This is fascinating, Brian, and thank you so much. And I'll certainly be looking forward to the paper when it's written, and I hope that you continue to share more of the outcomes as they become available. But I think you're doing great work, and I congratulate you on it. And there's some fascinating insights, as anyone who goes to your LinkedIn profile will see, and we'll put a crawl on the screen so that anyone who wants to explore further, go and follow up on that link. Brian Murphy, thank you so much indeed for talking to me.
Thanks, Nigel. Take care. Cheers.
As ever, Robin Hoyle joins us again this month, and he's talking about using your own mobile phone for learning. There's lots of controversy about bring your own device. Do people have enough available data? Robin explores it all.
At the start of lockdown, like many organisations, we had to move our programmes onto a virtual platform in some way. And we were fortunate in that we'd already got some experience of using virtual, and we'd already got quite a lot of digital resources that we could make available to people. So we were slightly ahead of the curve, but we also realised we had to do quite a lot of rapid development quickly. Now, in the pre-lockdown times, we'd already made a decision that we were going to design mobile-first materials. So in other words, our digital output was going to work on a smartphone. And as we progressed into lockdown and started to create lots and lots of material for this new environment, we decided to stick with that policy. And particularly what we wanted to do was to make short, sharp pieces that would enable us to reduce the length of time in a classroom, which is now virtual, to its absolute minimum. And the rationale behind that, of course, is that it's quite difficult to concentrate for a long period of time. We've seen other organisations who are running virtual sessions which last all day. And frankly, although I quite enjoy working virtually, I can't think of anything worse either for the participants or indeed their trainers and facilitators, because it's hard work doing this stuff. So we wanted to keep those sessions short, which meant that we wanted to put more material onto the digital resources which preceded or went between those sessions or supported activity back in the workplace once the sessions had completed. And we wanted to use video for some of that. So, along with lots of other organisations, we set up a channel, a Vimeo channel in this case, and that gives us all sorts of insights through its analytics capability. And what we were able to do is to see not only where in the world people were using these materials, but also to see what devices they were using. And so we took a snapshot of a month and we found that our videos had been used in the hundreds of times, almost 1,000 views of those videos across those channels. And bearing in mind, these are all private videos, so this is not people just logging in. These are people who are accessing them as part of our learning programs. And yet only 5 people had accessed them via a handheld device. 1 person had used them on a tablet and 4 people had used them via a mobile phone. So we could have said at that point, well, let's ditch the mobile first policy. Nobody's using this stuff via mobile. Why don't we go back to something which is a bit more media rich, which is more intense, which has got all sorts of other options that we could utilize? But we decided not to. We decided not to for several reasons. First of all, this too will pass. People will not be locked down and working from home all the time at some point in the future. And when they're moving around the place, we still want them to be able to access those resources, particularly because we believe that virtual will continue to play a significant part in the L&D landscape. So although people will be able to attend face-to-face courses again, they might not want to, or they might not be given the opportunity to, because organisations have found that virtual works. So we're going to continue to have this mixed smorgasbord of material available to people, and we're going to still want people to access video, and now they're going to be able to commute or travel or go other places, and so when they're out and about, why not make it available via their smartphone? We also have quite a large audience for our programs in the Asia Pacific region. And the statistics from there show that quite a lot of people, their primary browser is on their smartphone. They use the internet via their smartphone almost exclusively. They don't have access to a laptop or a desktop computer or some other internet access point. So if they're using that via their smartphone all the time, it makes sense for us to be where they are and to work with that group because they're a big audience, obviously. But there's another area of access which is important, which is we've also found quite a lot of learners within our programs who are, people in jobs, people in good jobs very often, people who are quite senior very often, still don't necessarily have high quality broadband. They don't necessarily have sole access to a computer, and they don't necessarily have the kind of technical skills which would allow them to use some of the more fancy things that we might want to put in a digital resource. So we've got to work with that audience as well, and many of them do have smartphones and are able to use them. But there's another challenge with access there, isn't it? And it's about how much data you've got. Even people whose organisations give them a smartphone, very often the amount of data that they have access to is limited. So we need to encourage organisations, if they're wanting to use smartphone technology, to raise the data levels that they make available to their staff. And then I started thinking about that in the other area where online learning has suddenly boomed, which is in schools and education. And if you think about what's happening in schools and education, there is a focus around those who are disadvantaged being given access to laptops. Now, number one, the process of doing that simply hasn't worked. Lots of schools, lots of local authorities are saying, look, we've supposed to have been able to access a load of laptops. We've not seen any of them. We've not been able to make them available to those students who need them. But I bet you that most of those students have already got smartphones, particularly in secondary schools. And if they've got smartphones in secondary schools, maybe a different way of thinking about this would be to say, do you know what? We're not going to give you a device. What we're going to do is work with the mobile phone companies to make sure that you have unlimited data so that you can access this material via your smartphone. Now, of course, that means that we need to redesign the way that we deliver that stuff, because designing for a smartphone is different from designing for other computer-based learning. So we need to think about how that works most effectively, because it seems to me that that's a very powerful technology which we can still use. It seems to me that video is a really powerful addition to that technology, and where we can create those opportunities for people to have multiple access points to the material, that I think is not just something which is useful for the pandemic. I think it will be useful longer term. So we're sticking with mobile first because we've found it really, really works. It's easy to translate and it's very straightforward in terms of accessing video via those platforms and via those programs. So that's the way we've chosen to go, despite the fact that because of pandemic, there's not been a lot of mobile access to those materials for the moment. That will change, as will our current situation.
Our learning experiences unlock potential, transform the performance of people and organisations, and help millions around the world build happy and successful careers. We change lives with evidence-based learning that works, sparking real change for real impact.
I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest to Learning Now Television. Such is the age of COVID that even though he's just down the road from me in Cardiff, we still have to do this on Zoom. But we first met in a coffee shop in Cardiff a couple of years ago, I believe, obviously brought together by the power of Twitter. So Neil Mosley is a digital learning designer and consultant. So previously at Cardiff University and Imperial University. Now working for himself, and he is here today to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on higher education and what that might mean for all of us as we go forward in this post-pandemic era. So Neil, very, very welcome to you today.
Hi, Kate. Yeah, nice to be here. Shame we can't be a little bit closer, given that how near we are. But such is life. Such is life.
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? So, I mean, I thought it would be interesting to get you on because, you know, there's obviously been a huge amount of talk about the kind of the impact of COVID on university students and university curricula, and, you know, just the very kind of foundational, you know, kind of being of universities. What does it, you know, what are people paying for if they can just learn online, right? And I think that there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I think that it's relevant to the Learning Now television audience from a kind of societal point of view, but also then, you know, how does that impact or affect or inspire, you know, some of the kind of the corporate education piece as well. So I'm intrigued to see, you know, what you think.
It's been really interesting because, like you say, COVID's just shone a really big light on the university model. And I guess what we found and what some of us knew already was, you know, that's everything is so centered around an in-person on-campus experience. And, you know, HE institutions have been able to provide continuity. The technology was there to be able to do it. But it's just proved incredibly challenging. And I think, you know, it's kind of quite rightly been framed as emergency remote teaching. You know, right from the outset, people like me and others who've worked in online education for a while wanted to make that distinction of this is not, you know, what online education looked before. This is kind of an emergency. It's about putting things online remotely and about probably like a pretty close replication of what you might have delivered on campus. And I think universities are still going through that, really. It was interesting thinking back to the start of lockdown where, you know, a lot of the narrative was, look, we can get away with this kind of emergency continuity-based kind of teaching for now, but come September, it's got to be up there with what we consider to be really high quality online learning and teaching. And I think, you know, I never thought that would be possible. And I think although, you know, great strides have been made, there's been some really good positives around people working more closely together, and people have learned a lot. There's generally more appetite, I think, in HE for, you know, how can we do this and how can we improve our teaching. You know, people are still kind of living through, you know, it's really difficult time of trying to find their way. You know, one minute you can do something on campus, the next minute you can't. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's just really highlighted a lot of things that were problems in the past, but it's just kind of shone a big light on them.
And I mean, we talk about at Fosway, my day job around corporate L&D. We talk about the fact that COVID has blown away any remaining barriers to digital, you know, transformation or otherwise. You know, do you think that that's true? Does it remove those last vestiges of, oh no, that's not for us from the universities, do you think?
I think because universities are big and complex, I think I'm always reluctant in saying this is going to fundamentally change universities. So the difficulty a little bit, I think, is that you've always got a group of people within universities who are, you know, big champions of learning and teaching. And so, you know, those are the voices that you can tend to, you know, see and hear a lot from, and you can get a false picture of maybe how broad the change might be. So I think what we'll see is we'll definitely see more blended, because, you know, the technology has been there. It's not necessarily been optimal, but it's never been used that expansively. So, you know, even things like teaching on Zoom, you know, I remember conversations and running sessions, you know, way before COVID, and there was just very little knowledge of that that kind of technology in learning and teaching. So, things like that have been completely blown open. And I think if people have positive experiences and students are on board with it, then I think we'll see a lot more of a mix. But I still think particularly undergraduate education is going to be centered around a kind of on campus, in person, but a kind of greater blend. I think in terms of other developments, I think postgraduate programs have got a long history of being delivered online. So I think universities may start to see the potential in that and in shorter courses, particularly around looking at professionals. And if we're thinking, well, there's going to be a lot of people wanting to upskill and reskill, what part do universities play in that, and how can they diversify?
Do you think at all that we might see longer term, do you think that we might get to the point where, if it is about reskilling and for older people who might be wanting to change jobs or have been forced into sort of looking for different career paths, do you think we might see kind of nano degrees or micro degrees, or something that previously they might have maybe gone to a community college or a night school for? We were talking about things like Udemy courses and things like that. It's ever so easy to learn these days and find different places to do that as an adult or a lifelong learner. Do you think that universities might be able to change their business model longer term?
I think there's definitely opportunities there, and certainly in my last role at Cardiff, there was increasing appetite for shorter offerings and a bit more flexibility in terms of how you might stack up modules and changing systems and culture and processes such that people could dip into modules from programs, could stack them up, could come in and do things as a standalone or build them up across disciplines. So I think there has been increasing appetite for that, and I think this probably gets to the heart of what I think will happen, in that the things that were rumbling along will accelerate a little bit. So postgraduate programs online were kind of growing. The idea that you do shorter kind of micro credentials was starting to grow. So I think those are the sort of things that we'll start to see in terms of what a university portfolio looks like. And then the undergraduate, because it's so strongly associated in our culture and just more broadly with the campus experience, I think probably the best that we can hope for is more of a blended experience there, I think.
And do you think that the tech is important for, the other aspects of learning? So not just the content delivery part, but, in corporate L&D, we talk a lot about, collaboration, space for reflection. Many years ago now, when I was at university, it was a business degree and it was very focused on like team projects. So, we had spent a lot of time getting together, and obviously, these kids are, growing up with WhatsApp and all of that kind of thing. It's quite a natural space for them to inhabit. Is that something that universities need to kind of grasp hold of more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the next big things, really, a kind of review and appraisal of what learning technologies and associated technologies are out there, because again, if you think back to kind of trends, you look at the disproportionate amount of investment on physical campus as opposed to digital campus, and you've got a situation where universities are running kind of LMSs that are 20 years old essentially, and that haven't seen a kind of radical evolution from when they first came to market, because it's sort of a self-fulfilling kind of thing. If you're not using them expansively, if you're not investing in them, then they're going to stagnate a little bit. And so they've just been, the typical content repository. Whereas now you get into using them more expansively, using them for, much more sort of social engagement and group work. You're starting to see educators who weren't that bothered by it suddenly feeling the real pain that these technologies aren't offering them the kind of experience and the efficiencies that they kind of see from, some of the other communication technologies in particular that we all use now in our lives. So I think we're actually starting to see that as well. So Coventry's moved to a really communication-based platform and replaced their LMS, and I think others are thinking about that. So I think.
So do you think it could come full circle? So where the learning management system in the corporate world almost sprang out a lot from the education, do you think where the rise of the LXPs and the learning system specialists around things like collaboration and curation and mobile and video and all of those things that we've seen, do you think that the universities would look at the corporate space as for some inspiration?
Possibly, yeah, possibly. I still think there's a bit of a divide between those spaces, even though there's like real similarities and there's a lot to be learned between us. I think people don't often look to that, and I think particularly in terms of things like LMS and LXPs, you've got 4 big players in higher education, really, and that's not just the UK, that's kind of more globally. So those still hold sway, but you are starting to see a few more platforms now positioning themselves as LXPs and coming into that space. But I think there's still that divide a little bit between L&D and HE, and I think it would be good to bring that together, because I think there's lots of lessons to be learned and shared, I think.
So Neil, thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's absolutely fascinating to see this story unfold. And if you will keep an eye on it, we'd love to have you back on LNTV soon.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Kate.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
Hannah Gore is back with part 3 of 5 on engaging conversations. This one is how to have engaging conversations at face-to-face events. I don't know whether that's face-to-Zoom events or face-to-face events, but it's a very important topic.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We're now on episode 3 of Engaging Conversations. In the last couple of episodes, we have been looking at engaging with stakeholders and engaging with online. So now we're actually at engaging with face-to-face. As alluded to in my previous episode of engaging and online, it's important to have a face-to-face element, and I advocated the flipped classroom methodology. But also, it is not just about learning, it's the types of engaging conversations that you need with stakeholders to get your projects moving forward. So, step number 1 will be, first of all, pick a suitable time and a suitable time frame to have that conversation in. We are all very exhausted at present with never-ending Zoom calls. So make sure that you're picking the right time in which a person is going to be engaged with you. Do not make them 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. It's a really bad idea. But also as well, make sure that you're not having a very, very long call. We are exhausted. We all have eye strain now more than ever before. So pick your time correctly, pick your duration correctly, and pick your tool correctly. So for example, right now on Zoom, you can blur out the backgrounds, you can put in virtual backgrounds. This helps enormously with engaging in face-to-face. Say to them, it would be fantastic to actually see you. I haven't seen you in a really long time, and make it more of a feature rather than actually a burden. So we've picked the location, we've picked the device, and we've picked the duration. Now what? Wow. First of all, at the top of the meeting, tell them what it is that you're actually looking for as an outcome to this meeting. So they actually know the kind of meeting that they're coming into. This may be a learning outcome if it's part of the learning, or it may actually be a stakeholder outcome if you're engaging with the stakeholders to get a project done. When it comes to learning, consider flipped classrooms. I alluded to that in episode number 2. There is a blog piece on it at drhannahgore.com if you want to take a further look about flipped classroom methodology. I personally advocate it heavily. Practice-based learning has proven time and time again to be a very useful resource, and it actually helps people in bringing together and assimilating ideas. So consider that when you're actually doing your learning development, the use of flipped classrooms. Secondly, if you're actually having an engaging conversation with a stakeholder, it's important for them to understand what it is that they're there for. What's in it for me? Now that works on 2 different levels. What's in it for me? Why the hell am I here? And what's in it for me in the outcome? So it may be that you can actually help reduce call times with members of staff, or it may be that you can help them bring forward a project that they're doing inside their business if you're training staff more effectively. So what's in it for them is very key for you to understand before you go into that meeting. Have take homes. So we're all exhausted at the end of the day. Make sure that there are take homes for them to take home to have a look at afterwards. So it could be a 1-pager, set of bullet points, an infographic, one slide on a PowerPoint, whatever it is, to summarize the importance of the meeting, what you need from it and what you need from them. What is it that they're going to get out of it? And that's very important because we're having meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And by the end of the day, we are struggling to work out what was the meeting at the beginning of the day. Did that even happen on the same day? All our times are blurring at present. Make sure that you stand out by having take homes that they can actually look at afterwards so they can see what they need to do to help you. So once you've done all of that, practice before going into that meeting. So that may mean that you have to brush up on your presentation skills, that you have to consider the types of outcomes that they may actually object to. I'm too busy, I don't have the time. You need to have answers to these in the meeting. I understand that you're busy, but you may be busier if you're constantly trying to keep up with all the different delays, or you might be busier in trying to deal with backlog that could be addressed through better learning and development. So have the sorts of arguments inside your arsenal. We don't have the resources right now. That is not a problem. We can plan for it now so we are ready for when the resources are available. Make sure that you are putting forward the urgency and the importance of what it is that you are actually discussing with them. So it may be that you need negotiating skills, conflict resolution skills, presenting skills, and communication skills. Brush up before you go into a meeting. We need to savvy up as business people more than L&D people, because it's now harder than ever for us to get our foot in the door. We can't see the people, we're all in a difficult situation, and resources are being reviewed every single day by companies. So make sure that you understand the stakeholders that you are actually stepping into, what's in it for them, and what is it that they need to do to help you. Hope you found that very interesting. There is lots of resources over on drhannahgore.com in the blogs. Take a look at those to see the types of things that you need to do to move those conversations forward. In the meantime, stay safe and take care. See you all soon. Bye.
Today, I'm extremely fortunate to be talking to not one, not two, but three of the leading proponents of L&D, and they cover the globe. First of all, Shannon Tipton, learning rebel that she is from Chicago, Illinois, is joined by Laura Overton, she formerly of Towards Maturity, analyst and thinker. And finally, Michelle Ockers, based in Brisbane, Australia, of michelleockers.com, and full of great ideas about what's been happening with L&D in the wake of COVID and post-COVID. So this is all about the Emergent podcast. What is Emergent? Michelle's going to explain that to us. Michelle, what is Emergent? Set the scene for us. What is this all about?
Thanks, Nigel. Emergent is a special series that is part of the Learning Uncut podcast. Earlier this year, when the pandemic kicked off, I did the Disruption series, which was about immediate response and how do we help learning professionals to get up and running with things they have to do at scale or for the first time they may not have done before. As the pandemic went on and we could get a pulse of what was happening in L&D, I could see that there was a need for something more. And I started discussing this with Laura and Shannon, and together we decided to kick off the Emergent series. We did that in early June. So we've been publishing episodes since the 23rd of June, 2 a week, every second week. And the whole intent of Emergent is to help the learning profession to explore what is going on with shifts in business right now and how we can prepare for something new after the pandemic, even if we don't know what that's going to look like, how we can emerge stronger. And the intent is to provide really practical insight, motivate people to take action right now when the opportunity is here to do something different, to consolidate, to learn from both what's happening right now in 2020 and the past, and to come out of this more relevant, more effective than ever. So our belief is that L&D can add value in new ways, and this is what we wanted to explore in the interviews, some of which were specifically about value. So we interviewed Jos Aretz and Geraldine Wust around how L&D can create business value. Jos from Tulsa, Geraldine embedded in an organisation, making that shift from order taker to performance partner. What does that look like? What do you do differently? We also had another episode specifically around how to make the business case for change with Laurie Niles-Hoffman and Dave Buglass. And interestingly, Dave was very triggered by the call to arms that now is our time. And he's suggesting, well, it's always been our time. We need to make a compelling business case and a reason why we should exist in the first place, more relevant now than ever. So that, Nigel, is what the Emergent series is all about.
Good. There's a crawl on the screen now, so anyone who's interested, just take down that link and go clicking, because these are really useful, interesting, and very rich podcasts. But the obvious question I've got for you, Laura, is what's wrong with traditional L&D reactions? Why do you need something emergent? What's wrong with what was always good enough in the past?
You know, that in one sense, there is nothing wrong, but the key thing that we were exploring is how can we really add business value into this new world of work? And is what we did in the past enough? I mean, I think all of us have seen the fact that everyone's been flooding into moving their face-to-face online, flooding content out, looking at how engaged people are with content. But is that actually enough? And, you know, it was 32 people that we spoke to, all kinds of practitioners, you know, it's 12 weeks of really intense kind of exploration that we had to. And one of the things that we asked them was not just how can L&D emerge stronger, but also what do we need to kind of stop? What do we need to start? What do we need to finish? So to your question, Nigel, you know, it was quite interesting that nobody said, let's throw more and more technology at our traditional training problems. So we had 32 people and no one said that that was actually the issue. And in fact, most of them said that we need a completely different lens on the problems that we're solving. 28%, and you know, I love a stat. So I was looking at, you know, how people were actually responding. We're saying that we need to stop prioritizing what we did in the past because it's a new future and we've got to really be thinking differently about the future. And to pick up on what Michelle said, you know, another 20+% said that we've got to stop being order takers, just responding. So we've got to start, we started to think differently. And in terms of what we had to start and accelerate, a lot of people were talking about switching on to becoming more business oriented. I think, Nigel, the session we did with you and Simon Brown from Novartis, when we're looking at culture and curiosity, that was one of your points. He said, let's start thinking from a business problem angle and start aligning ourselves to that. That was a common theme throughout. And the other thing that people were saying as well was, you know, we need to start looking outside of ourselves. And, you know, one in five of us were saying you need to look at whether it's at evidence or whether it's at what the business is doing, or Barbara Thompson and Shai Desai from Australia were talking about how do we leverage other partnerships. So, you know, I think what we're starting to see is some really powerful thinking. It's not us saying we've got to emerge differently. We just said, what do we need to do to emerge stronger, you know? And that was what started to surface out.
That was the context.
Conversation. Absolutely.
So Shannon, tell me, you interviewed all those people. What did you actually learn? What other themes came through that resonated and continue to resonate for you?
What was really interesting were the different threads that went through all 32 not 32 conversations, but 32 people with whom we had a conversation with. And the issues kept touching back to creating value, adding impact, and really what is going to come from this. And so what we went and did is that we went back and we looked at each of these conversations and we tied in all of the throughputs and we connected all of the dots. And the topics that came up, that emerged from our conversation, from where are we now in 2020 and how do we continue to thrive in 2021? The more popular topics were creating business value, making the business case for change, data analytics, working out loud, and building creativity and innovation into the future of work. And when we went back and we looked at some of these more popular podcasts that we did, we discovered that there really were 3 emerging themes. There were common threads that provided us with a lens from which to look through when we're answering the more challenging questions of not only today, but of tomorrow, of adding business value and creating that business impact that as L&D professionals, we all want to do. So those 4 themes were focusing on the importance of community, which was a topic that really resonated with all of our listeners, especially when it's coming from Julian Stodd and Rachel Happ. The use of data-informed decisions. Who can turn away when you've got Trish Ewell talking about data analytics? The value of experimentation and the impact of technology to better ourselves as we do prepare for the future. So these were 4 common themes: community, data-informed decision, the value of experimentation, and the impact of technology. And it was with these discoveries where we asked ourselves, you know, if we look at L&D challenges through these very specific lenses, what can we do to add value to our businesses, and how do we then strengthen organizational partnerships? Which is why we will be creating a special Work Out Loud Emergent Summit. Yes, you've heard it here, folks. You've heard it here first. What we're going to do is we're going to gather people together to work through organizational challenges using these 4 very specific lenses. And we're going to use them as guideposts to discover solutions that will add value and impact to their organizations. So this is going to be a really true working out loud, roll up your sleeves, get down, get dirty type of summit, where people are really going to be immersed into the problems that they're going to bring to the summit. And we're all going to work together to take a deep dive to help people figure out how they can solve the problems that they're having today and to continue to thrive in 2021. We're very excited about this very unique opportunity to present to our people, to our listeners.
Thank you, Shannon. So you've gone from podcasts to gather a huge amount of data and to share individual stories, to a collection of themes, 4 main themes: community, database decision-making, experimentation, and technology. And that's all going to be parceled together in a summit where you will gather more people to share more stories and generally aid the L&D, I suppose the L&D profession to look at the world in a different way and behave in a different way, and therefore come back post-COVID stronger than they were when they went into the problems that we've had over the last 7 or 8 months. I think that's a great agenda and an interesting story and a real global reach as well. You know what you're talking about, and you've talked to a lot of people to prove it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Laura Overton, Shannon Tipton, and Michelle Ockers for a fascinating project. And go listen to the podcasts and sign up for the summit. Thank you all.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
Well, that's it for another programme, and we're nearly at the end of 2020. Thank God, probably most people are saying. But we had some great discussions on the show today. Nigel, what kind of caught your eye most?
I loved the AstraZeneca account of the experiment that they did. And it was a real experiment. They had a control group and people drawn from right across the company, across all the areas of AstraZeneca, the factories, the sales, as well as the scientists. And what they were doing was seeing whether if they could engage people in the conversation really around learning to learn, i.e. to help them build a learning habit that allowed them to engage learning in the workflow. So to learn from the workflow, to share their insights, and whether that would have a difference in terms of the curiosity, the bravery, the innovation emerging from AstraZeneca. What a great idea. And the early indicators, only early indicators at the moment. It's not a done deal. It's not a finished experiment. But I got some early insight from Brian Murphy, and I thought it was very, very positive. And we all think learning, we know all about that. The truth is that we don't, and we can learn more effectively and get into the learning habit. That's what it's really about, developing the learning habit. Great stuff. Really interesting, Kate.
It is fascinating. And, what a great way to sort of bring us towards the end of the year. I think kind of one of the reflections for this year is probably how much we didn't know, at the start of the year, and how much we were underprepared for some of this stuff. So join us for our final programme of 2020 on the 10th of December. We'll have Christmas hats and sausage rolls and all things festive. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Silly hats aplenty. See you then. Thank you very much again, Kate. Bye.